Good morning, and welcome to Things That We Hope Will Blow Your Mind. And on my far left, Dr. Neal Kassell, a brilliant neurosurgeon, scientist, and medical entrepreneur. Dr. Kassell is the chairman and founder of FUSF Ultrasound Foundation, dedicated to the use of ultrasound as a non-invasive and more effective method to treat a number of diseases. Dr. Kassell was the co-chair of neurosurgery at the University of Virginia. He's a member of the Blue Ribbon Panel of Vice President Biden's Cancer Moonshot, which the Vice President spoke about this morning. Dr. Kassell received his undergraduate and medical education at the University of Pennsylvania. So, let's get started. So, Neal, as you listen to this, you're the one person up here who has actually cut into the brain as a neurosurgeon, yet you've decided to commit yourself to the new foundation of FUSF Ultrasound, to do non-invasive treatment of different diseases, including diseases of the brain. Explain to us what led you to do this and what you're accomplishing today and what you hope to accomplish in the future.
Do you want me to answer that now, or do you want to see the...
Let's see your presentation first.
Well, first of all, my children are going to be thrilled that I was introduced as being on the far left of anything. Thank you.
It was not an accident.
We just heard something about, there's a burgeoning field that involves the biological effects of physical energy. We just heard about light. Another one is sound, and that's what I'll be talking about. So focused ultrasound is a early stage, very early stage, non-invasive therapeutic technology that has the potential to be as revolutionary to therapy as MR scanning has been to diagnosis. So if it proves out, it will be a big deal. So imagine, what if you could treat a patient with a malignant brain tumor with sound instead of, or in addition to, surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, and thereby extend their life from 1 to 5 or 10, or perhaps even more years than that. It sounds like science fiction, but it's very much, the potential very much exists today. And it's something called focused ultrasound, again. So this is a real example of what's happening today. So in the bottom pane, you can see a left-handed 64-year-old architect who's had his career compromised by essential tremor, which is a cousin of Parkinson's disease, for more than 10 years. And you can see his attempts at drawing, not really good for an architect. So he was one of the first patients treated with focused ultrasound for this disorder. So the pane that just came up is an MR scan of his brain that was taken immediately prior to the treatment. And the blue dot deep in his brain is the target of those abnormal nerve cells that are firing away uncontrollably, causing the shaking. So he went into the focused ultrasound device, wide awake. He received no drugs, no incisions in his scalp or holes in his skull, and the target was treated with 1,028 intersecting beams of ultrasound energy. At the end of the treatment, his tremor was completely gone. Another MR scan was performed, which showed that the target had been totally obliterated. He could draw for the first time in more than 10 years. And here's a video of him 3 months later showing the durability of this treatment. So how does this work? Well, the principle is analogous to using a magnifying glass to focus beams of light and burn a hole in a leaf. But with focused ultrasound, instead of an optical lens, an acoustic lens is used to focus multiple beams of ultrasound energy on a target, in this instance, in the brain. And where each of the individual beams goes through the tissue, it has no effect. But at the point where all the beams converge, at that focal point, there are a number of interesting and important effects on the tissue. And the point in the brain where the ultrasound is focused is guided by MR scanning. And then the nice thing about it is that the treatment is controlled in real time by repetitive MR scans taken through the target every second. So you can see the changes in the tissue as they're occurring. And the changes are immediate and verifiable. Unlike radiation, the effects of radiation are invisible while it's being administered, and it takes weeks or months for radiation to become effective. So at that focal point where the beams converge, there are a number of biomechanisms that are relevant to the brain. The tissue can be destroyed either by heating it or by non-thermal mechanisms. Drugs can be delivered in extremely high concentrations, precisely to the point in the brain where they're needed. Much higher concentrations than can be achieved either with oral or intravenous administration, and also greatly minimizing the systemic side effects or complications. The blood-brain barrier can be reversibly and focally and repetitively opened to allow administration of drugs or stem cells. Tumors can be treated with focused ultrasound to enhance their immunogenicity and thereby help with the administration of the new immuno-oncology drugs. Tumors can be pre-treated with focused ultrasound, which decreases the amount of radiation necessary to treat the tumors by at least 50%. And then focused ultrasound can stimulate and block neural activity in voxels as small as 1 by 1.5 millimeters. The fact that there are so many different mechanisms creates the opportunity to treat a whole variety of disorders. The number of disorders in various stages of development is increasing rapidly. Currently, there are 15, and let me highlight a few. So the essential tremor that we showed you has been approved by the FDA. It still has yet to achieve commercial insurance reimbursement. Parkinson's disease, like essential tremor, there are pilot clinical trials ongoing to control the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and there are a plethora of preclinical studies to control or treat the underlying pathology that will allow restoration of function. Glioblastoma, opening of the blood-brain barrier to allow administration of higher concentrations of chemotherapy. Those clinical trials are ongoing. Immunotherapy for glioblastoma, preclinical. Benign pediatric brain tumors ongoing. Treatment of drug-resistant depression and OCD. Clinical trials ongoing in Korea, soon in Canada and the US. Epilepsy. And the first 4 patients have been treated in a very, very, very early stage pilot study of opening the blood-brain barrier for treating Alzheimer's disease. And it's a long shot, but nothing else has worked for Parkinson's, for Alzheimer's, so that's that. So the introduction of any new early stage, highly disruptive, game-changing technology is confronted with a number of challenges. There's still some engineering work to be done, nothing to be discovered. It's really, we're in the development, not the discovery phase. We still need a lot more evidence of safety and efficacy to satisfy the patients, the physicians, the hospitals and clinics that purchase the equipment, the regulatory agencies, and the payers. There's some regulatory issues. Many of these indications that I showed you are combination therapies, and the pathway through the FDA is still a little bit bumpy for those. And then there are cultural issues that are associated with the introduction of disruptive technologies, fairly fierce turf battles between the specialists, the physician specialists. Having said that, we're at the beginning of a difficult road that will take us to the point where I believe we can non-invasively improve the quality of life and longevity of life and decrease the cost of care for countless people with the most devastating disorders afflicting mankind.
Thanks. So, Neal, why don't you leave us with something positive that's happening today? When you talk about delivery of chemotherapy, explain how that works. How do you deliver basically very strong drugs to where they're supposed to go without causing all the side effects that we have today through focused ultrasound?
Okay, let me use Alzheimer's disease as an example. And again, this is a long shot, but the blood-brain barrier exists to keep toxins and bacteria and viruses from getting into the brain. But unfortunately, it also keeps drugs, important drugs, like for Alzheimer's disease, from getting in adequate concentrations. So what limits the effectiveness, and I think that there are good drugs for Alzheimer's disease, they've all failed in clinical trials because they don't reach the brain at adequate concentrations, because you can't give enough of it without creating toxicity throughout the rest of the body. So focused ultrasound could open the blood-brain barrier focally in the areas where Alzheimer's disease is beginning and get the drugs in much higher concentration than is currently possible today. That's a simple example. You can extrapolate that to Parkinson's disease and to brain tumors as well.
So we're moving in a very positive direction. We got a ways to go, but we're getting there much faster than anybody could have imagined, I guarantee, 10 years ago. And when we do this session 10 years from now, we're going to do it. I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to wear this little cap that Mary Lou's going to make for me, and we're going to have a good time without me ever opening my mouth. So with that, thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of our conference, and I thank all of our panelists.